Okay, so now we're going to talk about osmosis, and one of the things that you need to know about osmosis is it is really just diffusion, but with water. So it's when water moves from a high concentration to a low concentration through a membrane, like the cell membrane. Okay, so we have to understand that osmosis is the diffusion of water. Next thing I want you guys to do is recall what you should have learned from middle school. You have to know that a solution contains two components, okay? So let's say I put some sugar on a spoon and I add it to a cup of water. And the solution is composed of the sugar and the water. Now the sugar part is called the solute, and the water part is called the solvent. Okay, so this is the solvent, this is the solute, and when it's all mixed together it's called a solution. And the way you're going to remember that is knowing your alphabet: T, U, V. A solution contains a solute that goes into a solvent. Okay, so then you have your solution here. Oh, it's got some sugar and the water. Okay, so the next thing you have to understand is what happens when a solution is different on either side of a semi-permeable membrane. So for example, in a cell, sometimes the environment has more particles on the outside than on the inside. Sometimes it has more particles on the inside and then the outside. So what we have to understand is in a cell environment, there's a semi-permeable membrane, which is the cell membrane. And if there's a solute that is in lower concentration than inside of the cell, the water will actually try and dilute this concentration. So see, it's more highly concentrated. So let's pretend this is sugar or salt or whatever. So here's all kinds of molecules of sugar or salt. And there's very few over here, so the water wants to go over there and say, well, I have to make this more dilute. I have to add more water to it. And another way of looking at it is, I always say the water wants to go where the party is. So these guys are the party, so the water will head in the direction of the party. So then we have to look at the three different solutions that a cell could find itself in. Okay, so we'll make three solutions, and we'll put three cells in them. Okay, and let's just pretend this is the cell, this is the sac, okay? And we'll have one solution where there's more solute on the outside of the cell than there is on the inside of the cell. So there's a whole bunch of solute and just a little bit of solute in here. Then we'll have a situation where, let's say, there's the equal amount of solute inside the cell as there is outside of the cell. And then there's a third situation where the solute is more concentrated inside of the cell than it is outside of the cell. Okay? And so we have different words to describe this. So in this case, the solution is hypertonic. In this case, the solution is called isotonic. So it's got the same number of particles inside as there is outside. And then this one is called hypotonic because there's less solute on the outside of the cell. So that's a hypotonic environment. Okay, and then we have to understand which direction the water will move if the cell is placed in these different environments. So in a hypertonic environment, the water will actually go where the party is. So where's the party? The party's outside. So the water will actually go outside of the cell, leave the cell. Okay, so the net movement of water will be outside the cell. And in this case, the party is in both places. So let's say this is a living room and this is the kitchen. And the water goes out to the living room, says, hey guys, having a good party. And then it'll go back into the kitchen. Hey guys, having a good party. So the net movement of water will be equal. So it'll go back and forth equally. And then over here, the party's actually inside of the cell. So the water is actually going to move into the cell. because it wants to sort of dilute that concentration. So in a hypotonic solution, the net movement of water will be into the cell. And then we have to look at, well, what are the ramifications of that in a cellular environment? Because we have to maintain homeostasis in our bodies. So we want to make sure our cells are doing the right thing, but we also have to understand that water does its thing and solutions do its thing. So let's take a look at what might happen if a cell is in an environment that is not so favorable. Okay, so in an animal cell, here's what happens. So here's the solute concentration. It's very high outside the cell, but the same amount of solution is inside the cell. So they're saying it's isotonic. And sorry, they didn't draw the things inside. So let's draw them and say, okay, this is equal. There's a similar concentration inside and out of the cell. So the water will just be happy to move in and out. So in this type of cell, what's going to happen is the solvent concentration, or the solute concentration outside, is much less than it is inside. So if we have lots of concentration in here, then what's going to happen is the water is going to go, hey, the party's in there, I'm going to go in there. So the net movement of water will go in. And typically in an animal cell, which only has a cell membrane, an animal cell will actually take on too much water. And in a very sensitive cell like a blood cell, the cell will actually burst, okay? And it's called hemolysis in a red blood cell. And then the next situation is where the concentration of solute is really high outside of the cell and not very high inside of the cell. So the net movement of water will be out of the cell. And we actually get a cell that will shrink. Okay, so if you put a cell maybe into an environment that has too much salt in it, the blood cells will shrink. And we do this to ourselves when we our kidneys aren't working properly and we're not able to clean the fluids in our bodies and things like that. So we get problems with our blood when we're not taking care of our bodies. And so homeostasis is very important in our bodies. We want to make sure that we maintain, the proper concentration of solute to solvent in our bodies. And then let's take a look at the plant cell. Because the plant cell has a cell wall, the ramifications for different solutions are a little bit different for a plant cell. So if we look, the solution is hypotonic. That means there's more stuff inside the cell than there is outside the cell. The water will move in and it'll just sort of puff up the cell, which is good. Then if we have an isotonic solution, that's where the environment of the cell is equal inside and out. We'll have a net movement of water, actually no net movement of water, and that'll be pretty normal for the cell. And then we'll also have a situation where it's a hypertonic solution where there's lots of solution outside, and then the water will actually move outside of the cell. And this happens a lot in areas like Florida where fresh water and salt water mix, and there are some organisms who are unable to live in fresh water but can live in salt water, and other organisms who can live in salt water and can't live in fresh water. So if we were to take a freshwater marine organism like an Elodea and place it into the Gulf of Mexico, we would get this type of situation where all of the water from inside of the plant cells would actually leave. And so it's not a very good situation for a plant cell. But the cell actually would shrink a little bit, but because of the cell wall maintaining its structure, you'll only see a little bit of wilting. And then the last situation that I want to talk about in terms of the importance of osmosis in our bodies is when we're looking at our blood pressure. So if we have a high concentration of molecules inside of our blood vessels, the water from outside of our cells will actually pump into our blood vessels, and that will cause a high blood pressure. So people with high cholesterol, that means they'll have lots of cholesterol in their bloodstream, and so the water from their bodies will actually push into the blood vessels to try and maintain homeostasis. So they'll try and dilute the party, and that could have a bad result for the person, because then they'll have high blood pressure, and high blood pressure is not a good thing. We get high blood pressure as well when we eat a lot of salty food, so our body can't clear it as quickly, so we'll have a high concentration of salts, and so the water will move in to try and dilute that salt. So that's those are some of the ramifications for homeostasis in our body.